And now I have the pleasure to introduce today's presenters. And they are two of the four co-authors of Collective Student Efficacy, which is a Visible Learning official collection book. So Professor John Hattie is an award-winning education researcher and best-selling author with nearly 30 years of experience examining what works best in student learning and achievement. His research, better known as Visible Learning, is a culmination of nearly 30 years synthesizing more than 1,500 meta-analysis comprising more than 90,000 studies involving 300 million students around the world. He has presented and keynoted in over 350 international conferences and has received numerous recognitions for his contributions to education. Some of his notable publications include Visible Learning for Teachers, Visible Learning and the Science of How We Learn, and the newly published Visible Learning in Early Childhood. You can follow all things about Visible Learning on Twitter at Visible Learning. And Douglas Fisher is a professor and chair of educational leadership at San Diego State University, as well as a leader at Health Sciences High and Middle College, having been an early intervention teacher and elementary school educator. He is the recipient of an International Reading Association William S. Gray Citation of Merit, a Kent Williamson Exemplary Leader Award from the Conference on English Leadership of NCTE, as well as a Krista McAuliffe Award for Excellence in Teacher Education. Doug has published numerous articles on reading and literacy, differentiated instruction, and curriculum design, as well as books such as the PLC Plus series, Rebound, Leading the Rebound, and most recently, How Learning Works. You can find out what Doug is up to by following him on Twitter at dfishersdsu and on Instagram at dougfisher.educator. And in fact, I've heard he's doing a book giveaway this week on Instagram, so be sure to check that out. And now we'll get started and I'll turn it over to Doug.
Awesome. Thank you, Dina. Good to see you, John. And thanks for all of you being here from all over the world. From my hometown, San Diego, I see a lot of people from Melbourne. Welcome from Johnstown. So engagement, we're all talking about this, right? We're all talking about how to engage learners. What does engagement mean? How do we think about engagement? How do we monitor engagement? That's the big conversation we're all having as we reopen schools in this year. I'm not suggesting that engagement is simply a Nickelodeon classroom. I'm not saying that teachers should be like entertainers and performing for their students. That is not at all what I mean by engagement. And I've thought a lot about engagements over the years, and I thought a lot about how you get students to engage. And I really value this conversation of how engagement impacts learning, how your concentration and your persistence and your willing to engage builds your learning. And John will talk a little bit more about visible learning and visible learning database, but suffice it to say, it's an above average influence. When learners are engaged, they actually learn more. That probably doesn't surprise you. Amy Berry in Australia published this continuum of engagement. It came out right before we closed schools for the pandemic. I got this a couple of weeks before we closed schools, and it was perfect timing. Because when we opened schools from a distance, we encouraged teachers to talk to their students and have students define what each level of engagement looks like. What would it look like in our class if we're withdrawing? What would it look like in our class if we're participating, etc.? And then we said, why don't we have students set their intention today? Instead of getting angry or frustrated when learners don't engage, rather than trying to bribe them with points and things, what if we actually taught learners, this is what engagement looks like? And then invited them to set their intention for the day. What is going to be your level of engagement? And then encourage them to reflect. What was your level of engagement today? And how do you know? Do you have any evidence? And when I look at this, and it's logical, if you are currently withdrawing and I can get you to participating, you're going to learn more. If you're participating and I can get you to investing, you're going to learn even more. And the driving, you're probably going to learn the most. But if a student right now is avoiding, and we can move that student to withdrawing and take that win and feel good about it, and then work next from withdrawing to participating. See, sometimes we set way too high expectations, and then learners don't reach all the way to the end, to the right. and we're frustrated. So can we teach students about engagement? Can we teach them some language to think about their engagement, to set intentions on their engagement, and then to reflect on their engagement? So I'm going to show you a teacher doing exactly that. Him having conversation with his students and having his students define in this class, what do each of these look like? So you'll see Thomas do this in class. He's a high school teacher. We have examples from early childhood, elementary school, people having amazing conversations around Amy Berry's continuum of engagement.
I'm like, you know what? When you walk out of a classroom, when you end the day, you're like, hey, like, where was I today? So today we're gonna be learning about 3 things: disrupting, avoiding, withdrawing, participating, investing, and driving, right? All within the classroom. Okay, so here's what we got. I'm gonna take us through kind of this like a jigsaw, and I want us to get to a point where we can just kind of self-assess ourselves.
Okay, so when I think of disrupting, I think of obnoxious behavior that might disrupt our learning.
What kind of obnoxious behavior?
So like, kind of like what Hayden did earlier, when you like tap somebody and they're like, and you keep tapping them and tapping them, but they don't want to be bothered because they're learning.
Like, give me an example. Have you ever seen disrupting in a classroom? Like, give me some personal experience.
When a kid randomly starts like throwing things or randomly just starts like acting up for no reason, like do something that would get everybody's attention so that oh, I'm doing this and I'm doing that. So it can just disrupt everybody and mess up everything.
When you lose interest, what happens?
You like start to doze off, like thinking about something else. Yeah.
Probably just go to sleep in class.
Go to sleep in class. Cell phones probably another huge one. Good. What do you think the difference is between avoiding and withdrawing?
Avoiding, for me, it's like purposely avoiding, losing interest.
Yeah.
It's just like, I don't feel like doing it.
Right.
Investing looks like participating.
Actively participating.
Actively
Raising your hand.
participating.
Taking notes, good notes. Feel like what you're learning is important. Why is that like vital?
Because then they'll be interested too.
Good. And I mean, it's people like you'll be more engaged. You'll be like.
You'll enjoy it more.
One more time.
You'll enjoy it.
Good. What else? Right. So according to what we see here, driving is setting goals, seeking feedback, driving your learning, and tracking your progress. Right. How do you do that? How can you ensure that you're driving your learning?
By doing the most you can to learn.
Good. We're doing the most you can to learn, but like, what does that look like? Does that look like contacting your teachers?
Yeah, making
Right.
sure everything is turned on time, making sure
Checking
you're
in.
Checking in. What about when you're absent?
being prepared, emailing your teachers.
Being prepared, catching up. Good. How do we do that? Here.
I think by doing what you need to do.
Yeah, but like when you're absent, where would I tell you to go?
To Canvas.
Campus, right? Everything's on campus, right? Right. And then the last one that we talked about, like self-assessing. What is that? What is self-assessing mean?
Where you're at, like as
Seeing where you're at.
a learner, how much you know.
Perfect. That doesn't have to be like a test, right? Like that could be you just kind of reflecting, just taking a step back.
How well do I know this? What do I need?
Perfect. Well, we're going to go back to our home group. So you're going to go back to the table you first started at. When you get there, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk and discuss with our table group everything that we found out, everything that we learned.
Avoiding, is that like doing like the total opposite of what you're like the total opposite of what you're supposed to be doing?
Oh,
I think so. Like any kind of work. Yeah. So like the falling in line off task. We talked about basically driving, like it can fall in line with pushing yourself to do better in the classroom, not only a classroom setting, but a learning setting, anywhere you really learn. So yeah, so for example,
What did you guys do?
a big one for me was the success criteria. And time management, I feel like time management is a big one because you should make time to do what you're supposed to do. And you shouldn't really feel comfortable. You shouldn't really feel comfortable turning in your work like late just because you have the option to. Like that shouldn't, you shouldn't set yourself to do that. That's like it's you set yourself up for failure because of the fact that you turning in work like say for instance like a month later and stuff, you're falling back on a lot of things. So time management is really a big one for me. Time management and the success criteria, because if you can leave the classroom knowing that you accomplished and you can put a check by the success criteria, that's a big one.
So thank you all for the chat that was going on. I loved, thank you, Lori, for students are accountable for their own learning and they should know what engagement looks like. Why have we held this as a secret for so long? Why aren't we having students self-assess their engagement, not just their academic learning? So, and I hope you saw the jigsaw, like going back to different groups again and teaching each other and thinking through what does engagement look like. Now I've known Thomas for a lot of years. Every period when his class is over, the exit slip includes what was your level of engagement and what evidence do you have? He's teaching students to reflect. In the beginning of the class, he has them set their intention. And I hope Amy Berry is feeling really proud of the impact that she is having around the world of people actually taking her continuum and teaching it to young people. So engagement, moving from participation to driving. How do we have students move from participation to driving their own learning? And I'd like to argue that collective student efficacy, what we're going to spend the rest of our time together, is a way to recalibrate or rethink group work and having students learn that that is a way to promote engagement.
And this is where we want to make the links between what you've just seen in terms of the driving, striving, and thriving to also working at the group level. Now, if you actually look at the research evidence, many of you will know that teacher collective efficacy has a huge impact. Lots of discussion about this now, lots of debates about it. One of the things we've learned is that if the collective teacher efficacy focus is anything but on the impact of students, the effect goes down dramatically. So there's a whole lot of detail. And as you saw, Peter DeWitt's running a session on this about how you can get this happening. And I put it to you that if you want to see it in action, just go back to your experiences during COVID teaching. I would argue that in many cases, you saw more school leaders listening to where teachers were, what their issues were, what their problems of practice were, making links, and listening across schools as well as within the schools. We saw more collective efficacy in that period than often we see in the regular school. And so the effects of collective teacher efficacy. So a few years ago, Doug and Nancy and Shirley Clark and I were talking, and we sort of thought, what would happen if we took the ideas behind teacher collective efficacy that are so powerful and asked the question about student collective efficacy? Well, there actually is no research on this notion of collective student efficacy. We kind of invented the term, but it didn't come from nowhere. There actually is a tremendous amount of research on the components of collective efficacy, as you're going to see in the rest of the session. One of the things that we do know is the work on collaborative learning that the Johnsons were very big on in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, and a lot of work on cooperative learning and those notions, and they all have reasonable effects, but they're nowhere up in the league of the 1.3s, nowhere. And one of the things, as I'm sure you know, is that so often we put students in groups and ask them to work alone. So often students will work in a group and some will withdraw, some will actively disrupt, some will be very invested in it. And they get a sense at the end at times that it's very unfair that others are getting credit for the work I've done. So it's not as simple as just putting kids in groups. We want to go more than that. And the essence of this notion of collective student efficacy is this belief that working with other people, they will learn more. We certainly have seen that if you look at the employment rates in the US over the last 50 years, the employers are saying loudly and clearly that if you don't have sufficient content knowledge in the particular area you're going to be employed in, we can fix that as employers. But if you can't work in teams, if you can't translate, communicate, if you can't feed off others, then that's really hard for us to teach once you become 18 or 25 or whatever. And so one of the key arguments that prompted us to look at this collective efficacy is that if we aren't teaching the skills of working in groups, then we're not making our students employable. And that surely is one of our aims. And that maybe we have to sacrifice that credible breadth that we look at to make sure that sometimes during our teaching acts, you saw the working together, which you just saw there in Thomas's class. And so what we were looking for is, what are the key attributes that underlie this notion of collective efficacy? Now think of the words: efficacy, confidence. The confidence they can work in the collective and groups. And it's not just groups where we as teachers formally put them in, but as you saw in that class of Thomas's, when they mix up in a jigsaw, when they're talking in peers, when they're talking in social media, how do we make sure that they have this fundamental belief that by working with other people, they will learn more? So the three major attributes that underlie the efficacy. The first is that they have the confidence about their ability and disposition that they can contribute to the group. I'm sure you've all know teachers in the staff room who maybe even great teachers once they go back to their own roots, but when they come to the staff room, they don't have a lot of confidence to contribute. They don't think it's worth it. They don't think, oh, goodness gracious, I just want to go back to my room, close my door and indulge in my passion. So how do we get them to have the confidence that they do have worthwhile contributions, even when they are thinking about something aloud in a way that turns out to be incorrect? That is an incredibly powerful way for others to see what the correct processes could be and how we can see how people are processing notions. So the first attribute we want to look at is, how do we teach the students? How do we construct the scenarios so that there is a confidence about their ability and disposition to contribute to the task? The second one is the skills. And what we certainly have done throughout the book is talk about the skills. Let me give one example: turn taking. Sometimes in groups, one person dominates. That person hasn't learned the skills of group work, how to get other people's points of views, how to hear other interpretations, how to get other information to come in. So how do we look at the various skills of working in a group? And I'm particularly fond of the jigsaw method you've seen, because that's a very structured way to make sure that everybody, regardless of their prior ability, can make contributions to the group. And the third attribute, and quite frankly, the one I find the toughest, is the confidence or shared belief that the group can come up with a better answer than any individual. I have been a dean of education faculties for about 20 years in 3 different institutions. And I have sat in so many meetings where I've thought, oh my goodness, I could do this so much faster myself. I'm the problem. I don't have the confidence that the group will come up with a better answer. Now, as teachers, we have to be very mindful, as you're going to see in this webinar, about setting up the conditions so those 3 attributes not only have the probability of being experienced, but actually taught. And this one about having the belief that the group can come up with a better answer than any individual is a really tough one, but a really hard one. And we put these 3 skills and attributes up front because it's not easy necessarily to set up the whole notion of collective efficacy. But as you saw, when it happens, it's truly powerful. So in terms of our learning intentions, in terms of where we want to go today, we want to learn about the potential to amplify our effect. And I like that word amplifier in there. It's building far and up and above beyond We can get to a certain level by treating each child as the center of attention, the whole individualized instruction notion, which has a very, very low effect size. But it's how we work with others. Now, there's a problem. As Graham Nuttall showed, 80% of feedback kids get in the class, they get from other kids, and 80% of it's wrong. When you think through that, you've got kind of an explanation why we don't see a lot of group work, discussion work. It's got a big downside to it. And as we're going to hear today, we have to get this right. We don't say because kids can feed each other the wrong information in groups, they can go off path, it may not be a good investment of our time, therefore we're not going to do it. We're missing out. So our first intention is learning about the potential to amplify our impact on students. In terms of our success criteria, we're going to make a distinction between cooperative, collaborative learning. And we're going to look at the characteristics of effective collective student efficacy. So let's start by looking at the two notions, cooperative and collective. Just looking for my cheat sheet there. There it is. Chance to read that. I'm sure many of us have set up these cooperative groups. Individuals, group accountability for their project, collaborative, where they're working on the task. And how are we going to build on top of particularly the collaborative learning to teach the skills to actually work to build up that efficacy, that confidence to work in groups. So let's do some actions here in terms of how we move from cooperative to collaborative and build on top of that the collective efficacy. So Douglas.
Thank you. So one of the things that comes to mind as we were figuring out what did we know that could help build the collective efficacy with students? And the top of the mind in our original conversations was the group has to have an agreement about what success looks like. Do they accept this? This is what success will look like for us and for me. And as John was saying earlier, you have to believe, if this is going to be a worthwhile use of instructional minutes, you have to believe that what you're doing together is valuable, important. And I want to be clear, not everything needs to be cooperative, collaborative, and collective efficacy. There's a role for individual things that we ask students to do as well. But when we ask students to work with their peers, they have to have an agreement about what success looks like. And the most obvious is, do we define success at the collective level or just the individual level? There's a lot of places where the success criteria are framed as I can statements, and they start off with I can. And they're all individual. And there are things that we should each learn and be able to do as a result of the time we spend with our peers. But there's something more than that. There has to be something more for it to say, why are we coming together? What will we be able to do together? So we're starting to see movement where there's collective student efficacy success criteria that we can say, oh, this is what you will be able to do, and this is what your group will be able to. Both of these are important. So I thought I'd show you another video. Let's go to 4th grade. This is Sarah Ortega. And I asked her to film her early initial thinking as she explored it with her students, trying to build the collective. Now, importantly, this is new for her learners, and she's going to go through and talk to them about it. So watch as you see Sarah thinking through with her students, moving them to collective rather than cooperative.
Good morning, boys and girls. So today we're super excited because today is the day that you learn to work with the group to understand a text, but this is without me facilitating, where you and your group have been working together for a while. You've been reading stories and articles together, and you've been answering questions and having great conversations, but it's been with me facilitating. And today you guys are going to understand a text within your group without me facilitating. So why? That's a great question. And it's because we learn so much from each other. And when we interact with our peers, we reach new levels of understanding, and we also learn to problem solve together. We always look at what it takes to be successful for the day. And for today, what it takes to be successful is there's so many things that we've learned about how to do great collaborative conversations. And so first, of course, is contributing to the group's success by answering questions. Next would be, you could also look back into the text to find evidence. You can invite others to share. You can build on somebody else's idea that you really like, and or revise your answer based on what they had to say. You have to remember that when you're having a discussion about a book, that conversation flows. You don't have to answer in order where each person speaks. Just be respectful of not always jumping in first to answer or waiting for someone to finish before you answer, but it's a conversation. So you're just talking and building upon each other's ideas. And remember to always respect differences. Here's your checklist for today. You will read the text, you have a collaborative conversation about each of the questions. And then when you get to question number 5, you guys work together to type your answer out for question 5. You guys will all have access to this slideshow, and you guys will be able to work on it at the same time. And then at the very end, when you get to slide 14, that's when you get a chance to reflect on your work today. And we'll take a look at what some of those reflection questions look like. The text that you're looking at today is by Jason Reynolds. I love his novel called Ghost, Running for His Life, or From It. Ghost is your main character, and you're going to be reading an excerpt from this novel today. Here's your page that you guys are reading, and then you notice that the chapter, the paragraphs are numbered on the side. You'll go through each question again, having a collaborative conversation, building on each other, really interested in what each other has to say. When you get to question 5, you have a task to complete. You guys can again work on that together. And then here is your reflection page. When you're done with your task, your group will come back to slide 14, and you're going to answer these questions. So for example, what did you do to help the group today? So you'll stop and reflect on what were your contributions to the group. And then think about what else you could have done to help. What's an example of when I worked well in our group, and what's one thing that I could have done better? These will be your reflection questions that you'll submit today. Thank you, and I hope you guys have a great conversation with your group.
So Sarah is setting up her move from, we've been working more in a parallel, a little bit of cooperation, to now we're going to become a little bit more interdependent and teaching them to review their contributions. Her next step is, we were having a conversation, is how do we move to the we side of this? Yes, I contribute to the group, and I helped, and I listened and things. How do we move to the we? So we're in this work in progress of shifting students from some collaborative learning routines into increasing collective student efficacy. And it starts off when they have shared agreements about success. We also spend a lot of time talking about skills. And as John was saying earlier, there's a lot of skills we need to make this work. That's you, John.
Thanks, Doug. So let's have a first look at the I skills. And as Doug said, we're going to separate out the I skills from the we skills. And so when we look down this list of I skills, it's that confidence to contribute to the group, see themselves as their learners, how I can contribute and be part of setting up the group goals And the more I'm involved in setting up the group goals, the more I'm going to own them as I move forward in a moment to the we skills. And you can look down and read the other I skills here, but the notion is that some of you have commented in the chat, you do a lot of group work altogether. We're not talking about the group work. We're talking about the skills to do the group work. We know that some students are very reluctant to think aloud or to talk aloud with their colleagues if they're not 100% sure. Most of them have learned by age 8 that if you don't know the correct answer, look like you do, but hope you don't get picked on.
Yep.
It's the same when those kids are in groups. They sit back, they don't have that sense of confidence about their ability to contribute to the group. This is where your role is critical. Making sure, as you've just seen with that teacher just a moment ago, that as much as possible, every student has a responsibility to contribute to the group. And therefore we need to teach them the skills so they can realize that contribution. As we were going through our work, the word social loafing came up so often. The kids who sit back and let others do the work. It's kids who don't want to engage. Well, that's the killer of the whole collective efficacy notion. So teaching the skills, getting them engaged in setting up the success criteria for the group, getting them engaged in talking about the directions and making sure that the tasks is understood. For many students, not knowing exactly what the task is, thinking they know it, as opposed to checking it. And once again, this is where turn taking comes in so powerful. Those skills of conflict resolution, they need to be taught. It's as part of working in a classroom, working in a group. The skills of negotiation. What happens if someone has a view that you don't agree with? Do you go sullen? How do you engage without making it personal? How do you learn to attack the idea, not the person? And then those non-verbals, and you know how powerful they are for you as teachers, let alone students. They're brilliant at it in terms of their peer cooperation. So these are the sets of I skills. So let's have a look and see what happens when we start to implement the I skills. And then the we skills. This is the skills of working in a group. And the most critical is that first one. It turns out probably the most powerful discriminator of the lot. Think of it, you in the staff room for a moment. Can you stand in the shoes of another teacher or of your school leader and see the world through their view? That is a really essential skill to have to work in a group. Same with kids in the classroom. Like the whole premise of visible learning is, can teachers see learning through the eyes of the students? Can you stand in another student's view? And simple as this. So this is after that student has spoken, you say, let me tell you back what I think I heard you saying, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. And you actually show them that you have not only listened, but you have actually thought about that listening. What an incredible mark of respect to another human being to demonstrate you've listened to them, actively listened to them. And that whole active listening is the essence of social sensitivity. They're not rushing in to say, no, that's wrong, here's my view, but pausing. And so that's a really important skill, probably the most powerful skill in terms of working in groups. And as you can see from many of the others, the turn taking, the flexibility on taking on roles, not taking that same role all the time, but again, moving towards that standing in people's others' shoes. That collective responsible that we're all monitoring our progress. We're all working towards the group criteria, and we're all going to give that supportive feedback. I mentioned before about the feedback to other peers. And as we're going to see, there's a right time to go into collective efficacy and feedback, and that is often after the content, the knowledge is learned. At that time, it is very much about right and wrong. But when there are opportunities for multiple interpretations, that's where getting feedback from other students, getting students to say to each other, let me understand, Doug, what I thought you said and that what you just said. Is that correct? And building up those we skills. And these, as we're arguing, both the I and the we skills have to be deliberately taught. Doug.
Thank you. I got all into the chat. So yes, you will get, I just confirmed, we will include a link to the PowerPoint. You are welcome to use those PowerPoint slides. And I think about this, as an individual teacher, we can build collective student efficacy, even if our teams that we're on aren't yet great at it. So I don't want to say that we have to have amazing teacher collective efficacy. I think it's useful and students are likely to learn more, but we shouldn't hold back and we should get students into this because we can create a whole new generation of people who know how to work in productive ways. The next area is around the tasks and experiences. If we only have students in listen mode all day long, they're not going to have collective student efficacy. We have to design tasks that foster the collective efficacy. How do we build those experiences, and design those learning experiences so that there's the potential for collective efficacy? So here are a few ways that are out there in the evidence base of the nature of tasks. And John's done a lot of work on this, and Shirley Clark especially. So is the task additive? Is it compensatory? Is it conjunctive? Is it discretionary? And do we analyze the kinds of tasks that have the potential to build the collective or not? Johnny, do you want to say anything else about these tasks?
It's echoing that notion that there is a right time. And you'll see that the time when collective efficacy doesn't work very well is when there is a right answer, when there is a convergence. It is about this notion of trying to set up tasks that are additive. Now, this also goes to a key notion here. Sometimes that whole class teaching to do that information, that content, those facts, those ideas, is critical before we go to collective efficacy. And one of the things we've certainly found is that going to collective efficacy, going to many of those kind of problem-based learning methods too early is a killer. Only some students are ready for it and those students dominate. So making sure in the collective efficacy that you've dealt with and with the content, and this is one of the incredible powers of the jigsaw method, and there's so few other methods that deliberately go through teaching the content, consolidating it, and then coming to the stage where multiple views are really, really critical. And when you look down this list, we've tried to spend a bit of time to say, how do we actually, in lesson design, construct activities and therefore worry about the nature of the tasks we're going to go to students, depending on whether it's those four kinds of different kinds of tasks. That you can see from that, we've got the descriptions and examples.
Thank you. And then we have to build some success criteria around problem solving. What if we didn't limit our success criteria to content learning, but said to the students, today we're going to be working on solving some problems. And you're going to remember to make an estimate, underline important words, whatever it is. And those are, we don't have to always frame them as I can. That's an option. But look at your partner talk success criteria. Are you doing these things with your partner? And this is from Shirley Clark's work with younger kids, where they were having one-on-one conversations and learning how to have a successful partner conversation so they could add more members of a group. But do we teach this? Do we include these expectations in the lessons we have for our learners? And then this comes along, and for me, this really helped me think about the tasks we designed. And I saw some of you are from South Australia. This is from the South Australian government. And there are 16 techniques that they say can increase the kind of thinking that students do. So they call them strategies. I would probably call them categories. And then there are techniques. Now, originally I thought there was a rubric when I first saw it. It's not a rubric. It's 4 different techniques in the closed to open category. Different perspectives is not better or worse than many solutions. There are 4. I think of this more like a checklist. Here are 4 things we could do to increase the thinking required of our students. Here are 4 more things we could do to move from information to understanding. And then 4 more to move from telling to ask. Oops, there's an example, sorry, of many ways of knowing. So what if we said to students, tell me everything you know about the topic that wasn't on the test? We started doing this at our school. This is our students' favorite page. They love listing all the stuff that they know. Here's everything I know that you didn't ask me about. 4 more techniques from telling to asking. Having students engage in these Socratic questions or using dialogue or increasing voice. For example, moving to more debate. Having students take topics and debate them. Get more thinking out of students. And then last 4 more from procedures to problem solving. And when I read this transforming tasks when it came out, I noticed that, wow, 16. And I really appreciated it. It says, you're not going to do all 16 of these in a task. But maybe when you learn to analyze a task, here's the task I'm thinking of assigning, or we are thinking of assigning. Could we add 2 more of these to increase the thinking from our students? Could we add a little bit more to get their thinking going? And I really appreciated this. I really appreciate this as a checklist of saying to my team, okay, so here's the task. We're doing the jigsaw. We're doing this. What else could we add to increase the thinking in the tasks? So I want to show you a couple of students in mathematics, and you'll hear them back and forth about giving and taking and arguing and debating and trying to solve this rich task in mathematics. And the teacher adding some very specific things like many ways to solve it, use of dialogue, some additional things to increase the thinking that these high schoolers did on the task.
3, it's 4.
384.
No, I said 483.
Where do we put that?
And then B, which is 4, -4 then the one. Actually, no, it has to be negative.
It could go either way.
The negative. And then now we have to figure that out. That's you can't do that.
Wait, don't you plug it into the whole thing? Like you plug the 4 into the whole thing. I did. This is f of x minus f of a. So confused. Okay, so we're finding the derivative. So this is a formula. Yeah. So f of x is 3x squared minus 4x. Minus f of a, you plug in the limit into this. That makes so much more sense. I get it now. Yeah. So then you plug it in, and then and that's how you get this number, which you then factors. Yeah, and that's what you like rationalize. Okay. Minus like x minus 4. Okay, I get it.
I guess we go back here.
Okay, let's get a calculator.
At the end, they say, let's go get the calculator, because they want to work through the problem first in their minds. What's it asking of us? What do we need to do? And did you notice the interactions they're having and the level of trust? Lots of I skills to have the we skills come forward.
8.
The other part, what I like about that example, Doug, is that the students have got the confidence to think aloud and hear other students' points of views. And one of the things we've certainly noticed with COVID teaching again is that quite often, students are more prepared to do that over social media than they are in the actual classroom. You just showed an example there that was a real classroom. I ask you to think of COVID and how they use the chat functions to raise questions to you as the teacher or to their other students about what they don't know. And that's one of the key powers of the collective efficacy notion. It legitimizes not knowing. It legitimizes alternative views. And in alternative views, there can be failure. And that's okay, because the students are collectively working towards a group responsibility. So I have a responsibility to also make sure that Doug understands, and Doug makes the responsibility to make sure that I understand that we collectively own the product. And this is where assessment becomes critical. Because certainly, as some of you have noted in the chat, you use group work a lot. In fact, Rob Coe did a really interesting study where he found that 92% of classrooms, kids sit in groups and work alone. And this is the key here in assessment. And our argument is that we really have to have an assessment about the group product, about the individual's contribution to the group, because students often see what you value by what you assess. And if at the end of it, it's only the group product, then sometimes it's powerful for me as a member of that group to shut up, not participate, because I actually might bring down the group score. And that is not what we want here. And so we spent a lot of time in the book trying to say, how do you come up with ways where you can assess the individual, you can assess the group, and you can assess the individual's contribution to the group. And that's what we want to look at here. So what are some of the key questions? And we divide it up into this push, pull, press, and pause. And so one of the assessment questions of the process of the group work is firstly the push notion. How can others push my thinking? Getting students to be more articulate about the feedback they need to improve their learning. Now remember, students often are not experts. They don't know what they don't know. But that's our job, is to teach them what they don't know, and also to teach them that there is a don't know out there, and that it's okay to look for things that they don't know. And this is again where the power of the collective comes in. In the pull notion, how do I support others in pulling their thinking forward? And there's a real skill of self-respect needed here. It's not a dictatorship where you demand that others change their views, but how do you get into that negotiation? Because often, certainly I find, as I try and pull someone's thinking forward, I realize I'm actually pulling myself forward because I'm coming up with alternative views and different ways of looking at the world. And sometimes when I try and convince Doug or Nancy or Shirley on an idea that I know is emphatically right, I end up realizing that I actually weren't very convincing at all, and I need to go back and rethink things. And that's the power, again, of working in the group. And this press notion about how we smell the roses, how we stop and say, yeah, that was a great idea. Let's take that as now the basis of which we're working and move on. And at the same time, making sure that where there are dilemmas, where there are unresolved issues, that potential misconceptions, that we have a chance to go back and relook at them and just not ignore them, but they are part of the group think in this whole notion. And that power of pausing. I wish I did this more often, that you'd actually pause and hear your views as others say them, hear others' views as they say them, and that power of stopping again and listening to see what you're going. And the argument we're playing here is that these kind of assessment questions are key to the process of getting this whole collective efficacy skills and collaboration working.
Awesome. Thanks for the comments on these questions. I love these, helping me think through, like, where do we go next with this? A couple examples of some things. So if we're meeting as a group and we're looking at the social landscape of the US and the migration, immigration, and the push and pull factors that led to the rise of immigration during the Gilded Age, that's what we're studying. What if we could create a no-show chart with the groups and everybody contributes to the no-show chart? These are the things we know based on the success criteria. And this is a way our group can show the things we know. And they may be different from other groups. That doesn't mean they're wrong. It means this is how we show what we know. And these are the things we know. And as you are thinking about it from the teacher side of this, imagine collecting a whole class set of no-show charts and going through the no column and saying, here are all the things that my students learned. And here are two things that I thought I taught that are not appearing in the no-show charts. So for some reason, that didn't stick. So we can have students come up with this. We've done them color-coded. We've done them on Google Slides where students, each contribute. So we can have individual accountability for the group task. Here's another one, a single point rubric with success criteria in the middle. And then in the grow and glow columns, language frames for peers to give each other feedback. So in the second one, your plot has a natural sequence. And here are some language frames that you can use to share with your peers when you think it's really good in the glow column. And here are some language frames in the grow column, because I don't think right now your plot is very natural, or I don't think you've integrated source material or whatever it is. So you see a couple things here that we know have a strong effect. There's clarity of success. They know what success is going to look like. There's some peers teaching peers here. There's some language frames. There's peer support where you're allowed to be wrong. You're allowed to be tentative. You're allowed to say, I think that you might want to do this. And helping your peers get better. The mathematics, peer assisted reflection. So I gave you the whole page. I know it's that you can see the whole page at once. So here's our success criteria. You can see this is 1.1, the beginning of the school year. Here's our success criteria for this unit. So each day they learn some of these things. And here's some problems to solve. And then you're going to have peer review. And you're going to say, okay, here's what we were trying to learn. Here's what success is. As your peer, do I see evidence that you can read, understand, and translate between set notation, interval notation, and a number line? Do I see that? Do I not see that? So again, we're going against the success criteria and setting up systems for peers to support the learning of their peers. One of the characteristics that we're moving into collective efficacy. So we have shared agreements about success. We design really, really good tasks. We actually directly teach I skills and we skills. And we design assessments that show learners that their collective and individual learning is important to us. So that's how we've taken for something that has no research evidence behind it and said, what can we mobilize from the evidence that we do know and put it together into something called collective student efficacy? John, any final comments?
Yeah, I think it's that notion of being aware that we deliberately have to teach the skills to get collective efficacy working. It just doesn't happen by osmosis. We have to be clear about the success criteria. And as we've illustrated, maybe we need success criteria about the individual's contribution to the group and about the group. And we probably need assessment that relates to those, such as the one you've just seen, that's about how we work in the contribution to the group. So getting all those together, and it's pretty obvious that it's not as simple as just putting people in groups or saying that I do group work. It's making sure that all the students are actually deliberately taught those skills to get to this phase, and to think that how powerful that is. And whilst we keep saying there isn't actual research on student collective efficacy, and we hope that you will be part of developing that, there is a lot of research in doing a lot of the work that is underneath these premises that we're talking about that leads to this incredibly powerful notion.
Yep.
Great. Well, this is Dina again, and I just want to thank you, Doug and John, for giving so graciously of your time to present this valuable work for everyone. And also to thank everyone for joining us, for your engagement and your encouragement within the chat box. It was really cool to watch and see. And then to keep your learning momentum going with Doug, John, and other educators, you can register for one of the Corwin upcoming institutes. You can visit corwin.com/institutes to browse the full lineup of institutes. Use code webinars21 for $50 off any of your registration. 2 of our upcoming institutes include Making Learning Visible in a couple days. So if you're interested in that, you need to sign up right away. And also in a couple weeks, Accelerating Student Learning on November 4th. And now, as I promised at the beginning, we will have our book giveaway. So our winners, I will announce momentarily. I just want to make sure you know that I will send you an email to get your addresses to mail you a free copy of Student Collective Efficacy. And for those of you who don't win, you can use the code, you get 20% off and free shipping if you use the code webinars when you check out on corwin.com. So the winners for today are Lupe Molina and Matt Anderton. So congratulations, Lupe and Matt. Thank you for joining us and good luck with your book. And then let's see, we have a few minutes left. If we would like to have John or Doug would like to comment on anything in the chat or add any other last comments.
It's a pretty rich chat room.
It really was. Yeah. And yes, just a reminder, everyone will be getting an email in the next couple of days. We will include your certificate of attendance, a recording of this presentation, as well as the slide deck from the presentation.
I noticed someone asked about heterogeneous and homogeneous. Don't we love jargon words? This is where, this is one of Shirley's big arguments about collective efficacy. It works so much better when the group is mixed up, not ability grouping. And how you can bring all kids along and kids can bring themselves along. Because what you find with every student, that they've got certain assets that other kids don't have. Maybe they're not always in the high achieving group, but they still have assets. And sometimes working with another person that you can bring along is a massively powerful notion for any student. And so that's the heterogeneous means making sure you got variability in the abilities of the kids in the group. Much more powerful than when you have homogeneous groups. I wasn't sure I was fast enough to pick up so many other questions.
There was somebody asked if this begins at grade K.
Oh, you see more of it at grade K. And I'm an expert on that now because I'm a granddad and I've got my 4 granddaughters about that age. You see so much collective efficacy at grade 3, 4, and 5. Unfortunately, by grade 8, they think their job is to come to school, sit up straight and watch the teacher work. And it's all about that individual, how we can grow as individuals, not as we can also grow as the groups. So yes, it's absolutely ever present in K, and then it starts to slip.
Lots of thank yous, which yes, we all really appreciate everybody's time today. I'm trying to get to if there was any other questions, but so many thank yous.
Thank you all.
All right. Well, everybody have a wonderful start to your week. And thank you again for giving of your time to join us today.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.